talking.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Marilyn Cameron, and I work 2 days a week as a library technician at Red River College in Winnipeg. I would like to give you a report of our library's Indigenous subject heading modification project and how it is progressing. Before I start, I would like to give a big thank you to all my colleagues working on this project who helped with this presentation. I don't know how many of you listening are catalogers, so I've tried to keep the cataloging language basic, but there will be a few points made strictly for them. I will start with a brief word about subject headings themselves. As I'm sure most of you know, academic libraries in Canada use Library of Congress and or Canadian subject headings. I will refer to these as LC and NLC going forward. When we look at decolonizing Indigenous subject headings, our focus was primarily on those referring to First Nations, because Inuit and Métis are already both authorized subject headings at LC and NLC and require few changes. The subject heading for First Nation peoples were created way back in 1968 and 1978. So you can see in the previous slide, that Library of Congress uses Indians of North America and Canadian subject headings uses Native peoples. LC and NLC headings are authorized by committees and they follow strict cataloging rules. So the next slide, a very simple example is trees-Canada-periodicals. The topic is followed by place and place is followed by format. Where a subject has more than 3 parts, the rules can get quite complex. The next slide shows some examples of inappropriate, disrespectful, and culturally insensitive LC authorized heading in our very own library catalog. Academic libraries reflect and perpetuate these headings. The same goes for NLC subject headings. And you can see in the red box, the first few are Native peoples. And finally, another list of inappropriate subject headings from the LC Authority website. When the Truth and Reconciliation Report of 2015 was published, it stated that libraries, as sites of learning and instruction, have a responsibility and opportunity to participate in reconciliation. As we all know, the educational system has contributed to the negative relationship between Indigenous peoples, sorry about the phone, and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada. The CFLA, or Canadian Federation of Library Association recommendations, followed in 2016. Red River Library is currently working on 4 of these recommendations. Today we are specifically looking at recommendations 1 to 3. The first recommendation acknowledges the inadequacies in organization systems, and you can see this in our library by the many different search terms. The second one is to adopt a commitment to integrating Indigenous and Western knowledges in access, arrangement, description, and classification. And we are doing this by trying to change to more culturally appropriate subject headings. The third recommendation is to engage our user communities in our cataloging practice. And we are doing this by talking to college staff and students, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. The fourth one, which is not part of today's presentation, is providing staff training for doing subject guides, and you can see a list of ones we have already done at the college. Changing subject headings is a huge task, and so there's no point in reinventing the wheel. We became aware of the Manitoba Archives Project around the same time as the Truth and Reconciliation Report was issued. In fact, the CFLA, in its recommendations, refers to the important and groundbreaking work this group took on. The Manitoba Archives worked with university and college staff on this project, and one of its hopes was that other libraries would use it and build on it, such as we are doing now. This project's mandate was to find problematic LC headings and to replace the term Indian whenever possible. So the Manitoba Archives consulted with Indigenous experts, both local and from around the world, over many months. They questioned Manitoba Bands about what names they called their own people. The result was they changed or deleted 1,093 subject headings and added 120 new ones. This list was then sent to Indigenous leaders and communities around the province for consultation. The Manitoba Archives decided that Indigenous subject headings would change from a 3-level hierarchy to a 2-level hierarchy. So figure 1 is what LC currently uses, and figure 3 is what Manitoba Archives has now changed it. You can see the middle level has completely disappeared, including Indians in North America. In January of 2019, here is a tiny sample of some of the modifications. So you can see some additions are things like Band Registry, High Arctic Relocation 1953, Mother Earth Indigenous Spirituality. Changes, some examples are Eskimo dogs to Kimmick, Indian mythology to spirituality indigenous, and Indian reservations to First Nation reserves. A few were deleted, and you can see the example on the slide is Cree mythology. That would go for any other group mythology, such as Algonquin mythology or Ojibwe Anishinaabe mythology. That can be replaced with something with a dash religion or dash folklore. In January 2019, our library formed a committee to work with the list for Manitoba Archives. The committee was made up of public service and technical service library technicians, one of whom is Métis. We realized from our research that this was a concern of many academic libraries, but no libraries were really at the implementation stage. LC and NLC have done little to change their own subject headings. The NLC has been going through some major budget cuts, and their subject headings are not even freely available to libraries anymore as they've been outsourced to OCLC. LC is a publicly funded institution, and the government has a lot of control. For example, when a group put in a petition for the subject heading illegal aliens to be changed to non-citizens or unauthorized immigration, since human beings are neither illegal nor alien, it was rejected by the lawmakers. They passed a bill to stop it, saying it was a partisan policy. Therefore, changes are not likely from the 2 national libraries in the near future. You just go up a slide. So we looked at work being done in other academic libraries, the University of Alberta and Ryerson, who are at the initial stages. We also looked at the Waiwa Library at the University of British Columbia, which is the only Indigenous academic library in Canada. In February of 2020, we met with the college's Truth and Reconciliation Manager and the Manager of External Indigenous Strategic Planning. They were very enthused about the project and encouraged us to go ahead with implementing it. So we decided to move ahead on our own. I was assigned to change the subject headings. The committee plans to meet X number of times a year, hasn't been decided yet, with our Indigenous leaders at the college to have their advice on problematic issues and what changes they think might be needed. Their input is crucial. My priority was how to go about this in a logical manner so that all inappropriate subject headings would be changed. So my first task was to add new subject headings. This was done by title and keyword searches. For example, for the new subject heading, pipe ceremonies, I looked up records with the words pipe, ceremonies, rites, white buffalo calf ceremony, and so forth. Obviously, this doesn't mean the new subject headings will be attached to every item. They should be. But over time, as catalogers look at and edit records, hopefully more and more can be added. The most common subject headings to be changed are those with the word Indian or Indians, which is from LC, and the phrase Native Peoples, which is from NLC. With help from one of my colleagues, I created 3 Excel spreadsheets to find all these subject headings. I have just finished the first spreadsheet, which was to find subject headings with the word Indian. If the record also contains subject headings with the word Indians in it, I change those at the same times. So now that I'm starting the second spreadsheet with Indians, quite a few have already been done. Subject headings that don't have these 3 words or phrases are listed on the Manitoba Archives list, and I will go through them individually. Once I find the inappropriate subject heading, I check the Manitoba Archives list for the replacement subject heading and create any additional subdivisions that might be needed. So Indians of North America - material culture has now become Indigenous Peoples - material culture - North America. And for catalogers, you'll realize that North America has now moved from the beginning to the end of the subject heading. That is due to rules for geographical qualifiers. And also for catalogers, at the end of the subject heading, not seen by the public, I've used the mark code $2MARR, which means the subject heading is derived from the Manitoba Archives Red River subject heading list. It also received an indicator 7, which means it comes from a list that isn't an authorized or well-known one. For some subject headings, there is no equivalent Manitoba Archives subject heading. If I can make a new one up according to cataloging rules, I do so. I then add it to the Manitoba Archives list. So for example, Indigenous People-obituaries. The latest Manitoba Archives list is a 2017 edition. The Library of Congress and the National Library of Canada have added subject headings since then, so some of the archives subject headings are now the same as LC and NLC. When I noticed this, I removed them from the Manitoba Archives list. You might ask, why, if Indigenous Peoples is an LC heading, why do we need any Manitoba Archives subject headings with the phrase Indigenous Peoples? This is because LC does not consider Indigenous Peoples to be an ethnic group, and so it doesn't allow me to attach very many subdivisions or free-floating subdivisions, such as obituaries, to be added, because LC cataloging rules say you can only add the subdivision obituaries to ethnic groups. Politics and government, on the other hand, can be added to more than just ethnic groups, so it is allowed. So what do we do with the old headings? One of the biggest decisions we struggled with was what to do with the inappropriate subject headings. Our staff and students have been using them to search for a very long time, and if they no longer existed, they might not be able to find items they were searching for. The second issue is that most of our library titles are not physical copies owned by the library, but come from online databases and ebook providers, which we subscribe to. We are not allowed to edit these records, so they will always have the inappropriate subject headings. So this would mean items on the same subject would have different subject headings depending on whether they were our own physical copies, i.e. books, DVDs, or student videos, or subscribed digital copies. I started looking into the capabilities of our library management system and wondered if it had marked fields for non-authorized subject headings. Could these marked fields be searchable but hidden from public view? We could then move all the inappropriate subject headings into these fields. I asked our library system specialist if this was possible in our library management system, and the answer was yes. Since I made this slideshow, there has been some hiccups to that, so we are currently still working on whether this will be possible. This, of course, is only a partial solution. It will only hide those subject headings linked to our physical copies. However, it is a start, and it means that our library collection will only have appropriate subject headings going forward, and we will meet the Truth and Reconciliation recommendation. So after all the replacement subject headings have been added, we can then hide all the inappropriate ones. We should be able to do, many of these in batch so that they don't all have to be done individually. That is certainly my hope anyways. So as I go along, I continue to create and change lists. Here are some examples. One, I make a list of problems for further discussion. For 2 and 3, I've made a list of Manitoba Archives subject headings that are now also valid in LC or NLC. And 4, I list every group name I encounter so that we can decide later on if they need changing. And an extra one I've also made now is a list of every authorized subject heading at LC or NLC that includes the phrase Indigenous Peoples. And finally, I edit our copy of the Manitoba Archive subject heading list as I go. As I stated before, I remove any that are now LC or NLC, and I add ones that are not yet on the list. At the end of this project, this will then become the Red River College subject heading list, which all catalogers in the library will use when assigning Indigenous headings. This is where many of you perhaps can help Red River College. There are some of the subject headings that are not straightforward and have caused me difficulty. Here are some examples. So in the top left box are group names for Indigenous people not living in Manitoba. The one listed there is not particularly a good example, so I've come up with a couple of others. So the LC heading is Carrier Indians, but I know that the Carrier also call themselves Dekel. So which one should I use? Another example is NLC uses Huron, LC uses Wyandotte. Should I use which one, or maybe something completely different? And another issue that's recently come up for me is some groups use their names and they are also cities and towns. So especially in the United States, for example, LC has the headings Spokane Indians and Miami Indians. Well, of course, Spokane and Miami are cities in the United States. So I need to somehow have some sort of qualifier to say this is not a town, but this is actually a group name. And I haven't figured out what to use yet. Spellings are a big problem. The ones listed there, I won't pronounce them, but I have looked up Indigenous websites and they spell them in different ways. So how do I choose which spelling to use? And lastly on this screen is people who live outside Canada and self-identify as Indian or Eskimo. So an example is Yupik Eskimos who live in Alaska. They call themselves that. So should I then leave that subject heading visible? And should I add another one like Yupik Inuit or just Yupik or a combination of the three? Again, I haven't decided what to do with that one yet. Then there are individual subject headings. So the first one is an LC heading. And the big problem here is the last part, the subdivision Indian occupation. Indian I can change to Indigenous. What should I change occupation to? The second one is an NLC heading, which is Aboriginal Television Net Broadcasting. And I believe the reason NLC uses that instead of Indigenous is because of APTN, which is Canada's National Indigenous Television Network. And because it starts with the word Aboriginal, probably people would look it up by that. But should I change that to Indigenous Television Broadcast? And the last one is example from the Métis community. Red River Rebellion is referred to as Red River Resistance. So may I use that? And finally, there are no subject headings for some subjects at all. Nowhere. I can't find anything for the 60 Scoop or anything for urban reserves. So I've added them to my list, but again, I will have to consult at the committee level to see if these can be accepted. So the way forward. For some of these problem subject headings, I have made my own decisions for what to use, but only for the moment. I've started a Word document in which I've written each change I have made and the title of the resource so I can go back into them if necessary. When the committee meets, they can discuss these proposed subject headings and we can revise them as necessary. Because the Manitoba Archives really only deals with Indigenous people from Manitoba, my greatest difficulty really is deciding on group names. Apart from the Manitoba Archives and the Waiwa Library in British Columbia, who has their own list, I am struggling to find appropriate group names and spellings. So if anyone can help me with this, I would be very grateful. So this is probably only really a solution for smaller libraries where the number of records to change are not enormous. For larger libraries, perhaps this can be done by using normalization rules. These are HTML-like rules to make batch changes. So for example, you can have one rule to change one subject heading to another, and it will change all of them at once. I have written a few rules myself. It's quite difficult for a non-techie, and I have tested them, and they do work. However, due to being a small library, it would take longer to write the rules than just to change the headings one by one. This is also a very repetitive job, and so should probably be tackled in small batches. I think it would be very difficult to keep concentration 5 days a week. I find doing 2 days a week is difficult enough. I don't work in the summer, but my hope is that I can have most of these subject headings changed by the end of December 2020. We shall see if that actually happens. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Marilyn. We appreciate you sharing this information with us.
It's great it worked.
I am so glad it worked, you know.
Yeah.